What is going on, college basketball fans, and welcome to episode 4 of the Danny Hoops podcast. Woo! I didn't think we'd make it this far, man. We're continuing to do this podcast every single Thursday night at 10 p.m. But of course, if you can't catch us live, it is always up as a video under the live portion of my YouTube channel and in the Danny Hoops podcast playlist on my channel as well. So you can always listen to it after it goes live. But if you guys are here live, you can ask me your guys' questions, because I do take questions at the end of every College Hoops podcast here. And some stuff we got coming up on the channel. I think I got a video coming out on Kentucky and Coach Cal and the controversy he's been facing, so that will be out soon. Also, Creighton's downfall. Are they starting to look like that team that we saw in Maui? We're going to talk a little bit about both of those topics here today as well. We also got some news for you guys, and we're going to be talking about some bracketology, because I'm going to give you guys my top 7 seeds for each region. We're going to be talking about that today. So I have my 1 through 7 seeds all worked out here for you guys. I'm going to share those. We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to take the top 15 teams based on the AP poll as of this week. And we are going to determine whether they are contenders or pretenders. And then, of course, as always, at the end of every podcast, I am going to give you guys my Player of the Year candidates and my National Championship candidates, like I do every week. And then we will get into your guys' questions. So, to start us off, we got a little bit of news. As of right now, Missouri is actually beating Illinois at halftime, 51-27. What is happening there with Illinois? I mean, they had a bad loss to Penn State. Everybody was starting to panic, and I said, it's just one game. Let's not, think too much of it, because Illinois has some good wins on the season. They have a win over Texas. They have a win over UCLA, a close game against Virginia. They look like a legit team, and they have a super good roster, but now they're losing to Missouri by 24 at halftime. What is going on with this Illinois team? And that kind of messes up where I had them in my bracketology as of this point. But yeah, they'd probably be lower than where I have them at this point. Like I said, I have them in my top 7 seeds. They might move down a little bit, but let's get into some of the news that happened so far this week. So Nick Smith Jr., the top overall recruit for this season, the top overall freshman coming in this season, committed to Arkansas, was injured at the start of the year, but started to play the last few games here and showed a lot of promise, especially in the absence of Tony Brazile there for Arkansas. He is out indefinitely for the rest of the season due to right knee injury and right knee management. So I guess he's feeling some pain, some soreness, whatever you want to call it, in his right knee. He doesn't want to risk playing on it too much. It is some sort of injury, but he doesn't want to make it worse. So because he is, of course, projected to be a top NBA prospect and be making a lot of money. So he doesn't want to risk that. Love to hear your guys' thoughts about that for sure. And Nick Smith Jr. not going to be playing for the rest of the season, but that is a big time breaking news, especially for Arkansas and the SEC, because they came into the season, as a top contender in college basketball, like legitimately, and now 2 major season-ending injuries for this team. And how does that affect Arkansas for the rest of the season? I still think that they're going to be a NCAA tournament team. They still have Anthony Black. They still have Ricky Council IV. Some solid players there and a really good head coach in Eric Musselman. But from what we expected coming into the season, you got to think that Arkansas isn't going to be as high of a seed as projected and might not make as far as a run as they were expected to do. But we have a couple of bad losses that also are going to affect the March Madness bracket, because two teams that I would consider to be, towards, around a 6 to 9 seed when it comes down to March, lost to some pretty bad teams this week. And let's start with Iowa's loss, because Iowa already doesn't really have that good of a win on the season. They've had their opportunities against TCU, against Duke, but they were unable to get them. Unable to get it done. So, and this loss is really going to hurt them come March. This one's going to follow them all season long as they lose to Eastern Illinois by 11 points at home. So a very bad loss there for the Iowa Hawkeyes. I mean, that one's going to, like I said, carry with them all the way to March. They're going to have to carry that baggage. They're going to have to get a big win, some big wins there in the Big Ten to make up for it if they want to still be a tournament team. Also, Arizona State today lost to San Francisco. San Francisco still, not nearly as bad of a team as Eastern Illinois, but Arizona State lost to them by 37 points. And Arizona State was a team that had good wins on their on their resume. A win against Michigan, a big in a blowout fashion. They had a win against Creighton, which might age a lot better into the future as Creighton might start to get things turned around. So they have some decent wins on their resume there, due Arizona State, but that loss is going to hurt for sure. And another team around where I had Iowa, towards a bubble team, but a bad loss there for him. I still think Arizona State can turn things around and make the tournament out of the Pac-12. I think Iowa, they're going to have to make up for that one because that's a pretty bad loss. So I want to talk a little bit about Kentucky. Should Coach Cal be fired? I'm hearing this all around the college basketball community. How he's not in it to win the championships. He needs to be out of there. I disagree with this. I think that Calipari definitely should not be fired. I think Coach Cal is a great head coach, and every team is going to have its down years, and every team has their moments where they lose, they get upset in the first round, especially when you're a team like Kentucky. You're in the tournament pretty much every single year as a higher seed. And this is really, the first time Coach Cal has been upset that bad, like a historic upset. Let's not count him out yet. He still has a really good team there. He can get it turned around. It is a fairly young team, so we have to remember that as well, because a lot of the top teams in the country, especially this year, have some senior veteran players on their team. So we have to keep that in mind. Also, he has a massive recruiting class coming in, and he has the number 1, the number 2, and the number 6 overall prospects coming to Kentucky next season. And he's still one of the best recruiters out there. So I don't see any reason for Kentucky to really fire him at this point. I think that people calling for his head, a little bit dramatic there. I think that he definitely ride with him a little bit. He can get things turned around. Calipari is a really good coach. Next up, Creighton, 6-game losing streak ended today against Butler. So a really good win there for Butler. This is Ryan Kalkbrenner, their star center's first game back, and what an impact he had. He had 19 points against Butler and shot 8 for 9 from the field. I mean, he is such a big piece to this team. And this is this the start of Creighton's comeback? Are they going to start to look like that team we saw in Maui that won a close one against a healthy Arkansas team, lost a close one against a super good top contender in Arizona, the team that we all said has Final Four potential? Before they went on that 6-game losing streak where they lost to Nebraska, they lost to BYU. It wasn't looking good, but a big turnaround game here with their star center back. Can this Creighton team get things turned around? Because they have so much potential. I mean, they have one of the best starting fives in the country. They truly do. So now let's get to the main topic of this this episode of the Danny Hoops podcast, and that, of course, is the Bracketology. I have my top 7 seeds for you guys. And before we get into it, I just want to say, if you guys are not already, make sure you are following me on Twitter at DannyOlogy1. I'm very active on the Twitter as of this basketball season, and I plan to continue to be very active on Twitter with all things college basketball news, talking about the games, all that, and I'll follow you guys back. And of course, I will be letting you know when I have the videos and streams coming on the channel on the Twitter as well. So let's get into my 1 seeds. We'll go 1 through 7, one at a time. So here's my 1 seeds. I have Uconn as my top overall seed at this point, and then I have Purdue as my second 1 seed. I mean, those two alone, at this point in the season, 100% are 1 seeds right now. They are 1A, 1B for me in the rankings. And then I have Houston as my other 1 seed. They only have the 1 loss there to Alabama. They got a big win against Virginia on the road. They are a top national championship contender in my eyes. I have them as a 1 seed. And then Kansas. Kansas has looked really good as of late. I think that they deserve that final 1 seed there. You could argue Kansas over Houston. I wouldn't be mad at you there, but either way, I think these are the 4 1 seeds at this point in the season. Now let's get into my 2 seeds. I think the 1 seeds are pretty clear. Like I don't think there's many arguments for other teams to be over these 4. I could see an argument for Arizona to be a 1 seed. But we'll talk about them because they are my top 2 seed. I have Arizona as my top 2 seed, and then we have Texas, Virginia, and Baylor. And all these teams, I feel very confident that these are the 2 seeds at this point. I mean, Arizona, they have a couple good wins over Tennessee and against Indiana. I think that those are going to age very, very good for them throughout the season. I think Arizona is going to run through the Pac-12. I think that they are a 2 seed at this point. Also, Texas, they have really good wins on the season over Gonzaga and also Creighton, which might age a lot better in the future. They do have the bad loss there to Illinois, but that one was in overtime. And of course, the Chris Beard situation. I still think at this point, you can't really, I know coaching is so big in college basketball, so it's hard not to factor that in. But at this point, it hasn't caused any losses to go on their record. So I'm still going to have them up at a 2 seed. Virginia, a tough couple of days, before this week, I probably would have had them as a 1 seed over Houston. But since they lost to Houston, and also they had that tough loss the other night to Miami on the road, where they kind of got dominated really that entire game. I mean, they did have a late comeback. It just barely fell short. I still have them up here as a 2 seed, but a couple of bad losses. Have them down here. And then also Baylor, they have good wins on the season. A good win over Gonzaga in a close one. I thought that was a really good game between 2 super good teams. So these are my 2 seeds at this point in the season. And then let's get into my 3 seeds. We have Tennessee as my top overall 3 seed. I know that they had that loss at Arizona, but I still think that they actually, one of their best games of the season that they played in that game. They were starting to come back in that game and make a run. They had a bad backcourt violation, which was some miscommunication there. But I thought their offense was starting to click a little bit. Or is that going to carry into March? We'll see. But I liked what I saw from their defense against Arizona as well. They had a good win against Maryland earlier that week that they almost blew, but I still have them as a 3 seed. Gonzaga is up at a 3 seed for me. A huge win for them against Alabama. It seemed like Gonzaga was starting to lose a lot of their big games. They also have a good win over Kentucky this year. But yeah, Gonzaga, it looked like they were starting to lose, a lot of the big games they were in against Baylor, against these top teams. But they put up 100 points over Alabama. No overtimes in that game, just in regular time, put up 100 again. And I think Alabama has a good defense. Drew Timme is playing super good as of late. I have Gonzaga as a 3 seed here in this one. As my last 2 3 seeds, I have Alabama. Like I said, they just lost to Gonzaga, but I still think they should be up here as a 3 seed. They have a really good win over Houston on the road. That one's going to carry with them all the way to March. That is a super good win. So I think Alabama definitely deserves to be up here. Best freshman in the country in Brandon Miller. He had 36 against Gonzaga. Dude is a superstar. And then I have UCLA up as my last 3 seed. A really good week. They had one of the best weeks last week where they beat Maryland on the road, and then they went on up to Madison Square Garden and defeated Kentucky, a big East Coast road trip for UCLA, and they handled their business. So I have them up here as a 3 seed. Their only couple losses are to Illinois. I'm pretty sure Illinois and Baylor. So yeah, let's get into my 4 seeds. Like I said, we are doing 1 through 7. I'm going to cut off at 7 at for now at this point in the season, but we will do updated bracketologies for sure in the future. But here are my 4 seeds at this point in the season. I have Arkansas as my top 4 seed. The injuries aren't looking good for them. I don't really factor in the injury. So you could argue Arkansas, over a UCLA maybe, but I think UCLA's week that they had last week kind of put them above UCLA. Like Arkansas doesn't have they just don't have they haven't played as good a competition as the teams ahead of them, in my opinion. So it's hard for me to put them above them. But we will see when they get into SEC play if they can defeat teams like Tennessee, like Alabama or Kentucky. That'll definitely help their case to be a little bit of a higher seed. Also, I have Wisconsin. I feel like Wisconsin is being very underrated. I have them as my second Big Ten team, just behind Purdue. The way that they've been playing lately, they have good wins over Marquette, over Iowa. They've been playing really good over Maryland. Those are teams that have been playing pretty good. Like they beat Maryland and Marquette both when they were, playing their best basketball at that point. And Wisconsin, I think, is really underrated. They are well coached there by Greg Gard. I have them up at a 4 seed at this point. I also have Miami. They only have 1 loss on the season to Virginia Tech, but since then they have looked really good. They got a big, massive win over Virginia. They almost blew that one, but hey, I still have it as enough to make it up here at a 4 seed at this point. Also, I have the Duke Blue Devils, a tough loss this week against Wake Forest, but I still have Duke up at a 4 seed here at this point. Next up, we have the 5 seeds, and at the 5 seeds, all these teams kind of feel like 5 seeds to me at this point. First, we have TCU. I think TCU definitely has potential to climb. They had the really bad loss at the start of the season to a nobody team, but then ever since then, they have been looking super good. They got their full healthy team. They've been looking amazing. They got a good win over Iowa. I think TCU, once they get some better wins under their belt, they can definitely climb in these rankings. Also, we have Illinois. Like I said at the start of the podcast, they are losing right now to Missouri. At the time I started the podcast, 51-27, it was halftime. So that definitely does not help their case for being a 5 seed, especially when they have that lawsuit against Penn State and against Maryland. Not looking as good as we once thought, but they still have good wins on the season against Texas and against UCLA. So Illinois is up here at a 5 seed. Also, we have Indiana. They've had one of the hardest couple of weeks out of anyone this season. They had a tough loss on a neutral site in Las Vegas to Arizona. They had a tough loss on the road to Kansas, where they just got beat up. But those are 2 teams that I have in my top 5. So you got to give them a little bit benefit of the doubt. But it does show you I don't think Indiana is quite on that level of top contenders in the country. They just shown that they weren't able to even really keep it close against Arizona or against Kansas especially. So Indiana's down here at a 5 seed right now. I still think that they have a super good roster and a team that could make a run to the Sweet 16 in March Madness, maybe even the Elite Eight. They could get pretty far depending on matchups for sure. And my last 5 seed, I do have Xavier. They have, some losses on the season, but all two super good teams, and they played those super good teams close in Gonzaga, in Uconn. So Xavier is still up here as a 5 seed. They got a really good head-to-head win over West Virginia and also against some Big East teams as well here at the start. So here are my 6 seeds. I do have Virginia Tech, who would have been a lot higher for me in these seedings if they hadn't lost to Boston College. That's another upset I should have mentioned at the start of the podcast this week. A tough loss for Virginia Tech on the road to Boston College, a Boston College team that is not very good whatsoever. So they are down at a 6 seed now after that loss. But Virginia Tech still has a good win over North Carolina this year. We'll see. They looked like a really good team up to the point of that loss, but they are here at a 6 seed now. Then we have West Virginia. West Virginia looking pretty good. They've been winning. Their only 2 losses are against Xavier, which they on the road, a very tough environment there at Xavier, and West Virginia was in the lead and controlling that game all the way up to the very end. They kind of blew it, but tough environment. And then their other loss was to Purdue in the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament. So, 2 not so bad losses there. Excited to see what West Virginia has here in in Big 12 play that could definitely propel them up a couple of seeds for sure. Then we have Maryland. Maryland is a team that fell a lot. They're another team that had a really rough week. Tough losses to UCLA and Tennessee. Games that they weren't really in. They were never really in that UCLA game, even though it was a home game for the Terrapins. And also, they were getting beat up by Tennessee the whole game, and they started to come back in that second half, and they almost did it. So I give them props from that, but they just look tired, man. Maryland looks super tired lately. So we'll see if they can, they get back from this. They get a little bit of, each team will get a little bit of a break. There's no game Saturday, so we'll see if Maryland can come back re-energized. And my final 6 seed, I do have Memphis. They got a good win over Auburn. They played a super close game against Alabama on the road. Kendrick Davis is an absolute superstar, so I have Memphis up here as a 6 seed now. So next up, we have my 7 seeds, and this is the last seeds that I will be going over in this podcast. I do have North Carolina as my top 7 seed. I think that they're starting to get things turned around here as of late. They got wins over Ohio State and against Michigan, which, are decent wins. I don't consider them like top tier wins, at least for me, but they're getting the job done. They have a really, really stacked roster, so I have them up here as a 7 seed. If they can continue to play like this, they can definitely climb for sure. I do still have Mississippi State as a 7 seed. They would have been a lot higher, but they got a tough loss to Drake the other day. So that was a really tough loss, but that is their first loss on the season. You could say, well, Mississippi State, they don't really have that good of wins on the season. Well, they have a win over Marquette. That is a good win, and they've also been playing amazing defense. I think they're well coached there by head coach Chris Jans. The first year as head coach, I think Mississippi State deserves to be up here as a 7 seed, even though they just suffered from their first loss of the season. Another team, I'm very excited to see them play here in conference in the SEC. Also, we have Kentucky as a 7 seed, a team that doesn't really have any good wins up to this point in the season. They've had their opportunities, unable to really get it done, but I still think that they deserve to be around the 7 line at this point. You could argue, maybe down to an 8 or 8 or maybe even a 9, just based on that they haven't really beaten anyone too good. They do have a win over Michigan, but Kentucky, I have them here as a 7 seed, and my last 7 seed is Marquette. I probably would have had them up at the 6 line, but a tough loss on the road against Providence in double overtime. That one dropped them down to 7. But Marquette is still a really good team. They have an amazing 30-point victory over Baylor, and that one will carry with them all the way to March. So Marquette is my last 7 seed, and the last seeds we will be going over at this point. So love to hear your guys' thoughts on my top 7 seeds so far here up to this point in the season. Next up, we are going to go over the top 15 teams in the country based on the AP poll, and we're going to determine whether I think that they are contenders to win the championship or pretenders. So let's start it off with the number 1 team in the country, in Purdue. And I honestly think that this one is kind of interesting. Like, I don't think that Purdue are really clear-cut contenders. I worry about the Big Ten heading into March Madness. At this point, I am going to say Purdue is a contender at this point, but I got to see them play in Big Ten play, of course, but I'm iffy on Purdue. I think that their freshman guards, in Braden Smith, in Fletcher Lawyer, they are going to have to improve their shooting for sure. That's going to help spread out the offense, help get the ball into the post there for Zach Edey. So I'm kind of iffy on Purdue, but I am going to say that at this point, undefeated, looking really good. They have good wins over Gonzaga, over Duke, over West Virginia. I got to say Purdue is a contender to win the championship. Next up, we got Uconn. This one's not much to think about for me. I'm going to say Uconn is a contender for sure. I think that they are the deepest team in the country. They have the best bench in the country. They have a really good center in Sanogo. They have an awesome player in Andre Jackson Jr. He's your do-it-all guy, your energy guy, insane athlete, insane playmaker, able to pass the rock there at the forward position. So I really like UConn. They are a contender for me, and they have guards that can shoot the rock. So UConn for sure a contender. Next up, Houston. And honestly, a lot of these teams up here I have as contenders at this point. And Houston, no different here. I have Houston as a contender. Houston, they showed me a lot in that win on the road there against Virginia, a Virginia team that I'm starting to get pretty high on. I mean, even though they've been losing, I still think they got their first couple of losses on the season. I still think Virginia is a super good team, and Houston, one of the best backcourts, one of the most experienced backcourts as well, not just talent-wise, but with experience in Marcus Sasser and Jamal Sheed. Their center, their freshman center, I'm really, really a big fan of, and Jarris Walker. I think that he can improve throughout the season and only get better and better. I think that is going to be a huge piece for the Houston team. And they also have some underrated freshmen there that come off the bench as well. Houston has an underrated bench. Kelvin Sampson is an underrated coach. And I definitely think Houston are contenders to win it all this year. At number 4, of course, we are going off the AP poll rankings. At number 4, we do have the Kansas Jayhawks, and Kansas, I'm going to determine they are a contender. I mean, these top 4 teams in the AP poll are my top 4 teams that I had as 1 seeds. And so I actually do agree with the AP poll right there. I do think that they are the top 4 teams at this point in the country. Kansas has been killing it lately. I mean, they have a 30-point victory over Missouri on the road, which is starting to look better now that Missouri is beating up on Illinois. They have a big win over Indiana, which they blew them out at home. Of course, we all know Allen Fieldhouse, one of the toughest places to play, but Kansas has some good wins. A good win over Duke at the beginning of the year. I think Kansas, for sure, at this point, the way they're showing, are contenders. I mean, You have Jalen Wilson, who is a bucket, one of the best players in the country. You have Daquan Harris Jr., who I think is one of the most underrated point guards in the country for sure. He is a guy who played in that national championship game last year, along with Jalen Wilson. So they have that experience there, and Daquan Harris Jr. is one of the best defensive point guards in the country. I mean, he can lock up almost anyone, and that is going to be huge, especially come tournament time. Freshman Grady Dick, I do think he needs to improve defensively, but that dude is a firecracker. He can light it up, and he can also drive to the basket as well. He's not just a shooter. He is an all-around scorer. I really like Grady Dick's game. At number 5, we do have Arizona, and Arizona, I gotta say, again, contender. They've been playing super well lately. A good win over Tennessee, and at times, their offense didn't look as good against Tennessee, but you also got to take into consideration Tennessee has a super good defense, and they were still able to come away with a win in that one. A good win over Indiana, which I do think that they match up really good against Indiana. But yeah, Turbellis there at power forward is just a mismatch problem for almost everybody in the country. At 6'11", can shoot the ball. Tough matchup there, and they have some good guard play as well in Courtney Ramey and Krista as well. At number 6, we do have Virginia, and Virginia, I'm going to determine Virginia's a little bit iffy, after this last week, but I'm still going to say they are contenders. So all 6 top teams, I am going to go with contender. I still like what I see from Virginia. They have a very experienced team. I really like what they have off the bench at this point too. Vanderplas. How about Ben Vanderplas off the bench for Virginia? I mean, that dude is an absolute firecracker. He was the main reason they almost came back and beat Miami the other night. So I really like this Virginia team. I think that they are a team that could improve throughout the season. And like I said, a veteran team, a super good coach in Tony Bennett. I have Virginia as contenders. At number 7, we do have the Texas Longhorns. And this is the first one I'm going to say. I have Texas as a pretender. I don't think that Texas is going to be able to get it done at the end of the season without head coach Chris Beard. I just don't think that they're going to be able to win it all. I have Texas as pretenders. I do think that if they did have Chris Beard and Timmy Allen was starting to get more incorporated into this offense, they need to go to Timmy Allen more to let off of those guards, those good guards in Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter. I do think that they still can make a run under interim head coach Rodney Terry, but I don't think that they're going to be able to win the national championship. I have Texas as pretenders. Next up, we do have Tennessee, and I have Tennessee as pretenders. I just don't see Tennessee being able to win the national championship. They've choked time and time again. Tennessee is probably worse than Gonzaga when it comes to choking in March Madness. I mean, they always seem to do it. They have these really good teams. They do have really good guard play in Zakai Ziegler and also Vescovi, but I just don't see them having enough there to get it done. I don't see Tennessee winning it all or even making the Final Four this year. So I have Tennessee as pretenders. Next up, we do have Alabama. And Alabama, I know that they beat Houston. They've looked really good at the start of this year, but they still got beat up by Gonzaga. They got beat up by Uconn. I'm going to say Alabama is a pretender as well. I think they have a superstar on their hands in Brandon Miller. They got some good guards there in Mark Sears, but I don't really like Quinterly's game too much. I think, he can go out there and get you a bucket, but he wastes a lot of time on the shot clock whenever he is going, dribbling around there. And at times it can be rewarding. He will get you a bucket, but I think against the top tier teams in the country, the teams that they would be facing if they made the Elite Eight or the Final Four, I don't think it's going to be able to get it done. So I have Alabama as pretenders. I don't see them winning the championship this season. Next up, we do have Arkansas, and this is our 10th team. We'll just do the top 10 at this point, and then we'll move on to our next section of the podcast. So last one, we have Arkansas. Arkansas, I have to have them as pretenders, and to no fault at their own. I think if Arkansas was a fully healthy team, they still had Tony Brazil, they still had Nick Smith Jr. I would probably say Arkansas are contenders. I think they do have, a little bit of a hard hole there at the center position, but they can manage that with really good forward play and really good guard play. But I think without Nick Smith Jr. and without Tony Brazil, I gotta say, Arkansas, they are pretenders at this point, and honestly, to no fault of their own. Due to injuries, I just don't see them being able to get it done this season. So let's move on to the next part of our podcast here, and that, of course, is where we get to the end of our podcast. I'm going to give you guys my top 5 player of the year candidates at this point in the year, and also my top 3 national championship contenders. But before we do that, I'm going to give you guys my top 3 coach of the year candidates, because why not? I had some extra time doing my notes for the podcast today, so I thought, let's talk some coach of the year candidates. So number 1, I think it has to be Dan Hurley. I mean, what he's done with that Uconn team. A lot of players seem to improve. He dug into the transfer portal, got some good guys. This team's looking really good. They're my number 1 team in the country. I got Uconn. I got Dan Hurley as my top coach of the year contender. I think what he's done has been amazing this season, and from where we expect Uconn to be, a big surprise here. So Uconn head coach Dan Hurley is my number 1 coach of the year candidate. At number 2, I do have Purdue's head coach Matt Painter. I think Matt Painter, I made a whole video about Purdue and how they were supposed to have a rebuilding year after losing Jaden Ivey, after losing Travion Williams. They come back and are ranked back-to-back number 1 in the AP poll, and are looking super good, undefeated, going to be more than likely undefeated heading into Big Ten play. Matt Painter definitely deserves to be a contender for Coach of the Year. And my number 3, I do have head coach for Mississippi State, Chris Jans. And I know they just lost to Drake, but I still think Chris Jans deserves a lot of recognition. This is his first season as Mississippi State's head coach. He came from New Mexico State, and New Mexico State, they got a win in the tournament last year. So I think this is actually a super underrated and maybe one of the best hires from this past offseason. And head coach Chris Jans doing some great things there for Mississippi State, and a very good defensive team. So it's coaching whenever they got their stuff together there defensively. And just until the past couple of games, they've held every single one of their opponents under 55 points. Super impressive. I think Chris Jans, he's going to pull off some good wins in the SEC. So don't sleep on Mississippi State just because they got their first loss. I still think Chris Jans deserves a lot of recognition as my 3rd placer in Coach of the Year candidates at this point. So now let's get into Player of the Year candidates and also national championship contenders. And then, of course, after we do this portion of the podcast, I will take your guys' questions. So you guys can start thinking about your questions if you guys want to ask them down below in the chat. And after we do it, our Player of the Year and national championship contenders, I will, of course, answer your questions here on the podcast. So, Player of the Year candidates, I think number 1 is obvious. It's got to be Zach Edey. Zach Edey averaging 23 and 14. His team's undefeated. You got to have Zach Edey as the top contender. Not much more to say there. Same as last week, same as really every week. Zach Edey, number 1. Number 2, I actually have Azuolas Tubelis from Arizona. I think what he does for this Arizona team super underrated. They have one of the best teams in the country. He's a 6'11" guy who can shoot the rock, averaging 20 a game and over 10 boards a game. Just an amazing player there for Arizona and for a top contender in the country. So I have Tubelis as my number 2. At number 3, I do have Jalen Wilson for Kansas. Dude is an absolute bucket. Another guy who's averaging 20 a game. A guy who's averaging above 10 rebounds a game. And for a Kansas team that has been playing amazing lately and looking like a top contender in the country. Killing almost everybody that they play. So Jalen Wilson coming in at number 3 here for me. At number 4, I do have Drew Timme and Gonzaga. They're heating up. Drew Timme's going to move up this list because he's really been carrying them. He had a big game against Alabama. He was dominating Noah Clowney there, the freshman center for Alabama, and he's really just been dominating everyone over the course of his past 4 or 5 games. Definitely deserves a lot of recognition. He's up in the top 5 this week. And at number 5, we do have Brandon Miller, the only freshman on this list, and Brandon Miller is just killing it. He had 36 against Gonzaga. He's averaging over 20 a game. I mean, this kid is he's a beast, man. He definitely deserves to be top 5 at this point. Some honorable mentions. Yeah, Oscar Tshiebwe, who's been killing it lately, but Kentucky's not really winning. I don't think he deserves to be in the top 5 at this point. A guy who almost made my list is Jamie Jaquez. UCLA has been playing amazing lately, and Jamie Jaquez, a big reason why. He's averaging 18, I think 8 and 3, something like that. So, some really good numbers there. Jamie Jaquez, super good player for UCLA. And also Terrence Young Jr., super good player. Illinois is not looking good as of late. We'll see if he could get turned around there in Big Ten play. He can definitely try to climb his way back into the top 5 contenders. Now, we got my 3 national championship contenders. Go ahead and drop your questions in the chat, and I will get to them right after this part of the podcast. So, my number 1 national championship contender, same as last week, it's Uconn. I think Uconn is the clear number 1 team in the country right now, and the clear number 1 contender at this point in the season. The Huskies, they just, like I said, deepest team in the country that is going to do them so well when it gets to March Madness. They have good guard play. They have a good center who can get some buckets. They have good backup center who's 7'1". They're going to be a tough team to stop, and I really like this Uconn team. I have them as my top contender. At number 2, I do have Houston. Houston got a big win against Virginia on the road. I think Houston has a good all-around team, a team that plays super good defense, and down the stretch, Houston, I think that they also have a super good chance at making it there to the national championship. At number 3, I did decide to put Purdue, and like I said earlier, I'm a little bit iffy on Purdue as far as being able to win the national championship, but at this point, I still have to have them up at number 3. Zach Edey is such a mismatch problem, but I fear if a team in the tournament finds a way to slow down Zach Edey or finds a way to just slow him down or get him some extra fouls, get him in foul trouble to where he's not going to be able to get into the game. I do think that Purdue is vulnerable to be upset when we get to March Madness. So that's kind of why I'm iffy. Some honorable mentions: Arizona and UCLA, both from the Pac-12. They almost made my top 3 this week. So those are my top national championship contenders. Of course, we do my top 5 player of the year candidates and my top 3 national championship contenders every single week at the end of the podcast, right before we take your guys' questions. If you guys want, make sure you guys follow me on Twitter at Dannyology1. I am going to start asking for questions on Twitter before we get into the podcast. So that's another way you guys can get your guys' questions on the podcast, that especially if you guys aren't in here live and you listen to it after and you want your question on there. That's a good way to do it. Follow me on Twitter, and you can ask me your question beforehand. So then I will have it, and you guys don't have to be here live if you're somebody who listens to it after. So yeah, let's get into your guys' question. And speaking of Twitter, I have my first question coming in here on Twitter from my man Alex, and he wanted to ask me, what 2 Final Four matchups would you most like to see happen in 2023 March Madness Championships? So some Final Four matchups I would like to see. I would love to see Uconn versus Purdue. I think that would be an amazing matchup. I feel like kind of even guard play there, especially if Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer kind of improve a little bit. And also, I'd love to see Zach Edey take on Sanogo, or Zach Edey take on the backup Donovan Clingan, who is 7'1". That would be just a treat to watch. And 2 undefeated teams, that would definitely be my top Final Four matchup I would love to see. And another one I would like to see is I would like to see Houston go up against. That's tough, man. I would like to see Houston go up against. I think Houston versus Kansas would be a really fun matchup because um, Houston and Kansas. That I like the way that works out. I like to see how Jarris Walker, if he can get some stuff going there, and also how the guards, the defensive guard play in that game would be outstanding between Marcus Sasser and Daquan Harris Jr. I mean, who's going to win that matchup? They're both super good defensively, so that would be a lot of fun to watch. And then, of course, you got a superstar in Jalen Wilson. Houston's going to have to try to find a way to account for him. So I think that would be another matchup I would love to see. So we got some other questions in here in the chat from your guys. So we got one coming in here from Gary Patterson, a.k.a. my man Gavin. He says, will a 15 seed beat a 2 seed again? So like the past 2 March Madnesses, we've seen a 15 seed upset a 2 seed this year in March Madness. So let's take a look at my 2 seeds. So my 2 seeds right now from earlier, we have Arizona, Texas, Virginia, and Baylor. I don't think I don't know. I definitely think actually Texas and Baylor could be vulnerable to being upset by a 15 seed actually. I actually could see that potentially happening. So I would say it's possible, but again, I don't think it will happen. I think 2 years in a row, it doesn't happen quite often. We kind of take it for granted because it just happened 2 years in a row, but it actually doesn't happen that often. So I'm gonna say no, but it's such a treat when it happens. We can't take it for granted. It's been pretty amazing. So we got another one coming in here from Alex, and he's going to ask me top 3 most disappointing freshmen so far this season. Quick water break, but top 3 most disappointing freshmen. Okay, so I got to think of a few. So number 1, it's got to be Derek Lively. Derek Lively there for Duke has been super disappointing, and I know he had an injury preseason, but ever since he's been back from that, he's been super disappointing. You could also put in Derek Whitehead, but I'll put them in there as a duo. Both of them together are my most disappointing freshmen. And then number 2, I actually think maybe Khalil Ware for Oregon. I thought he was going to come in and kind of dominate the same way Isaiah Mobley was there for USC in the big year that they had. He's a 7'3" guy. He can, he's lengthy. He can shoot. Khalil Ware, I thought was going to be an absolute problem for this Oregon team, but he hasn't really even been starting this year. He's been coming off the bench. He hasn't been doing much whenever he has been getting the minutes. So I definitely think Khalil Ware would be another disappointing freshman that I've had this year there at Oregon. He's definitely a 5-star. I want to say he was a top 10 prospect coming into this year. So definitely number 3, another one off the top of my head, kind of a hard question to answer, but I could say Nick Smith Jr. there at Arkansas, and I know it's due to an injury and him sitting out, but I'm still going to say Nick Smith Jr. just because he was the top overall prospect, and him being out indefinitely is disappointing. So I will say he is a disappointing freshman just because we're not going to get to see him play this year in college. So very disappointing that we're not going to get him. So any more questions, drop them in the chat. If no more questions, then we will probably get ready to end the podcast. So we got one more coming in here from Gary. Before I answer this one, make sure you guys drop your questions before we get out of here. So if you guys want anything else answered, make sure you guys drop them in the chat. So my man Gavin wants to know best team in the Big Ten. I mean, for me, it's pretty easily Purdue. They've been killing it this year, but my second best team in the Big Ten, kind of surprising. I'm going to go with Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin has been other than Purdue, the most consistent team there in the Big Ten, I could definitely see arguments for Indiana. They're definitely more talented than Wisconsin. I do think by the end of the year, I would say Indiana will probably be better than Wisconsin. But right now, I have Wisconsin as my second best team, just behind Purdue. So Purdue's kind of easy. So I'll go ahead and say the second best team in the Big Ten for me right now is Wisconsin, especially with Illinois having some big time troubles against Missouri. I got to check the score after the podcast on that one. So we got a few more in here, and then we will go ahead and end this episode of the podcast. So Alex wants to know, who are a few head coaches that might retire next? So that's kind of a big one there. I have heard some rumors that Bill Self is thinking about retiring not too long in the future. I don't know how much I believe in that. I still think he's got some good time. You got to think Tom Izzo at Michigan State might be starting to get there, but you never know with these guys. Some of these guys, they might just want to coach until they drop, So I could see Tom Izzo. Yes, Jim Boheim, I see you in the chat. Definitely a good one that I haven't thought about, but yeah, Jim Boheim for sure at Syracuse, a guy I could see. That's actually probably that's a super good one. I'd have to go with Jim Boheim for sure, but yeah, for sure. Next up, this will be the last question before we end it. Another one from Alex. He wants to know, who would you say, Danny, are the top 5 most overall depth teams in college basketball? So my top 5 teams that have the most depth. Number 1 is easy. I got to go Uconn. Off the top of my head, I got to go my team, West Virginia. West Virginia has insane bench depth. They play 10-man deep. Super, super good bench. So West Virginia, I'll actually go number 2. Number 3, I don't know if I'm going to get to 5 because that's kind of tough to think about on the spot there. Number 3, I got to think of another team with a super good bench. And there might be other teams that might have better benches, but off the top of my head, see, this is a tough question. I definitely think Uconn. I definitely think West Virginia deserves to be in the top 5 of that discussion. But yeah, a third one. That's tough to think about. Really, I could go Texas. Texas has a pretty decent bench. They're definitely not the third best bench in the country, but I will say Texas does have some pretty good bench pieces on that team. So I'll rock with them for now. But that's going to do it for episode 4 of the podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe if you guys are new. We do this podcast every single Thursday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, so you guys can join us live. You guys can ask me your guys' questions at the end of the podcast here live, or you guys can follow me on Twitter as well, at Dannyology1 on Twitter. And I will be taking your guys' question before the podcast. So if you are unable to watch us live, you can still get your question answered, and you can listen to it as a video, which will be up under the live tab on my channel after the podcast is up. And it will also be under the playlist tab if you go to the playlist tab and then hit the playlist titled Danny Hoops Podcasts, and you can see every episode that we do from this podcast under that playlist. So that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for listening, and everybody who joined us live today for this podcast. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching. I'm out.